This is Shir 28 in our series on Avodas Habitachon. Today, we're continuing to analyze the profound question of whether a person can actively achieve their wealth through their own personal charitzos by being exceptionally zealous and hardworking. The Yavetz, in his commentary Lechem Shemayim on Kedushin Perek Daled, explains that if a person does not plant, he obviously will not be able to harvest. Even if an individual's mazel dictates that it's proper for him to receive Meah Sha'arim, meaning a massive, extraordinary volume of sustenance, if he fails to put in any effort whatsoever, it will remain impossible for him to actually access and unlock that pre-existing potential. The Yavitz notes that this is the deeper meaning behind the famous verse in Mishlei that we brought up in last year, the Yad Charutzim Ta'ashir. This verse refers specifically to someone who already possesses an underlying mazel destined for Ashiras, wealth. Despite that heavenly decree, he will be completely unable to access those resources unless he builds a natural vessel through proper efforts. While it remains entirely true that if wealth was never decreed upon a person from the outset, he could work as aggressively and as humanly possible and still never achieve it, the reverse is also true. If a decree from Shemayim dictates that he deserves wealth, he cannot simply sit back and expect the mazel to deliver it on its own. He is bound by natural laws to deploy physical methods to actualize this wealth. The Gemara Nida Daf Ayin Amud Beis records a list of theological inquiries that the people of Alexandria presented to Rabbi Shua ben Chananya. Among their questions they asked, Ma yaseh adam v'yashir? What must a person do to become wealthy? Rabbi Shua responds directly, Yarba b'schoiro v'yisa v'yitim b'amuna. He should expand his business activities and conduct his business dealings with absolute integrity and faithfulness, a awareness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Alexandrians immediately challenged this answer, pointing out that many people have aggressively expanded their businesses and conducted them with perfect honesty, yet they never managed to become wealthy. Recognizing their objection, Rabbi Yeshua corrected their focus. If raw effort alone has failed them, then they must instead be Yevakesh Rachamim V'misha Oisher Shaloi, seek mercy from the ultimate provider to whom all riches belong. As the verse explicitly declares, Li HaKesev V'li HaZaviv, mine is the silver and mine is the gold. The Gemara asks an essential question on this dialogue. If the ultimate acquisition of wealth depends entirely on seeking mercy from Shemayim through prayer, why did Rabbi Yeshua initially instruct them to increase their commercial labor? The Gemara concludes that a person fundamentally requires both components and operating in tandem. To achieve wealth, one must actively expand his business dealings, conduct those dealings with deep emunah, and couple that labor with an intense plea for heavenly mercy. This concept is supported by a parallel Gemara in Brachos, Daf Lamed Beis Amud Aleph, which dictates that there are four distinct areas of life that require constant, aggressive reinforcement. 1 is Torah study, 2 is Ma'asim Tovim, good deeds, 3 is Tefillah, prayer, and 4 is Derech Eretz, worldly occupation and business. Rashi clarifies the halachic meaning of Derech Eretz in this context. If a person is a craftsman, uman, or a merchant, a soicher, operating in the marketplace, he must constantly strengthen himself within that specific trade. This explicit ruling demonstrates that a person is expected to be deeply, heavily, and extensively engaged in their physical business. The Chofetz Chaim addresses this dynamic in Shem Olam, Shar HaChazakas HaTorah, and Perek Vav, speaking directly to individuals who are already deeply entrenched in the commercial world. For these people, it is psychologically and practically difficult to limit their business activities or reduce their hours they spend working. The Chofetz Chaim reveals that the Torah itself created a beautiful structural remedy for this demographic through the historical model of the tribe of Zvulun. Zvulun were entirely comprised of international businessmen, as documented by the verse, Zvulun l'choif yam yishkoin. They spent their lives traveling on the open ships to manage extensive trade routes. Naturally, because of this intense commercial lifestyle, they were physically unable to sit in the tents of study and learn massive amounts of Torah. Yet the Torah never looks upon them with disdain or speaks negatively of their heavy commercial focus. On the contrary, it crowns them with an explicit blessing. Semach zvulun b'tzeisecha, rejoice zvulun in your going out. The Chofetz Chaim notes that even though their lifestyle forces them to be extensively engaged in trade, because they channel their wealth toward supporting and upholding the Torah, their intense business becomes a massive merit, allowing them to fully rejoice in their labor. The Shulchan Aruch Harav codifies a very similar perspective in Hilchos Talmud Torah, Paragimel, the Kuntres Achroin. He writes that if an individual lacks the natural and intellectual capacity to fully capture the crown of Torah, the Keser Torah, he feels he can't just sit and learn. He bears absolutely no heavenly punishment for choosing not to adopt that specific path of absolute ascetic piety. Instead, it is far better and highly commendable for him to act as a marba b'schayra, to engage extensively and heavily in business, specifically so that he can generate the resources needed to support and sustain Torah scholars. He defines this role explicitly as a person who actively maximizes his commercial dealings to uphold the spiritual elite. From this entire convergence of classic rabbinic sources, we face a massive glaring question. Every single one of these authorities explicitly implies that there is a distinct value, preference, and mandate to execute a massive volume of physical labor and extensive ishtalus. If a person has a destiny for wealth, they are told to work heavily in business to trigger that mazel. But if our core foundation remains true, that ishtalus possesses zero independent power and independent casual power, that it is merely an arbitrary entry fee, and that your sustenance is fully locked from above, why would Chazal ever instruct someone to execute a large volume of business? Logically, we should be telling people to perform a standard, average, or minimal amount of work. While the precise boundaries of how much ishtalus a person is required to perform will be unraveled in future shiurim, it is clear that we should conceptually never be encouraging people to expand their labor to such immense degree. In the Sefer Baiteach, the author suggests an answer to solve this immense tension by invoking a supreme metaphysical principle, the obligation to minimize the miracle. In the natural matrix of our physical world, true wealth only manifests when a person expands their business operations. Therefore, HaKadosh Baruch Hu structured the providential conduct of the world such that in order for your pre-decrees of wealth to flow down without tearing the fabric of nature, you must act as a marba b'schayra. You must work extensively to provide a dense, natural cover that completely conceals the miracle of your divine blessing. This is the exact operational framework that the Ramban highlights regarding the construction of the Ark of Noach. Even though every single physical dimension of the Ark's survival had and capacity was an absolute blinding miracle, Noach did not adopt a passive attitude, building a tiny, insufficient box while lazily relying on a miracle. He was commanded to build a massive, complex ark because the absolute will of Kadosh Baruch Hu is for mankind to exhaust natural physical methods in order to minimize the visibility of the miracle as much as humanly possible. In our upcoming shiurim, we are going to continue to strip away the layers of this topic and explore the exact quantitative boundaries of our daily efforts.